DeSantis, his team, there was an article in Politico right before they announced, in which it was a rare case in which somebody in the campaign off the record went to mainstream media outlet and explained their strategy. They said the strategy is going to be to say that we're winners, Trump's not a winner, and we're far more extremist than Trump, and that what the base wants is a really, really vile and mean candidate who's really going to punch down harder on gay people and teachers, etc. And we and women who want reproductive rights, and we're going to show that we're far more mean.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aaron Rupar Show. Today I have one of my favorite recurring guests, David Lurie, who is a lawyer and a political commentator. He's written a lot of good stuff for Public Notice, the newsletter that I publish, including today a piece on Ron DeSantis, someone who he has actually written about now going back about 5 years, on how campaign resets will not fix what's broken with DeSantis and his campaign, kind of a pre-mortem looking at what went wrong. Even though DeSantis is still running, it seems kind of like a foregone conclusion at this point that his campaign will fizzle out. Maybe we will live to regret these words, and someone will pull this clip a year from now when DeSantis is at the RNC being made the Republican nominee. But I kind of doubt that's going to happen. And so David and I kind of go deep, looking at the problems with DeSantis politically, personality-wise, and we discuss if it was even possible for someone like DeSantis to beat Trump this cycle. We also get into Trump's legal issues. David has a lot of expertise just on how the federal court system works. And so we talk about how some of the motions to change venues in the Georgia case could gum up the works, what Trump legal defenses might look like, and just kind of the broader state of play now that we've seen all of these indictments, all four of them, the New York one, the two federal ones, and the Georgia one, and how those will impact, Trump politically, but also what his legal fortunes look like, and the possibility that he could serve time in prison, either sometime in the near to midterm future, or possibly, if he wins the presidency again after he is done in the White House. We also wrap up the conversation today with a little bit about Hunter Biden, simply because I think there is a lot of confusion about what's going on there. And David actually makes a case towards the end of the podcast that Hunter is being treated unfairly with this special counsel who Merrick Garland appointed just a few days ago to oversee the case. So thank you for tuning into the show. I ask viewers and listeners, if you appreciate what we're doing here, to please subscribe to the show where you can. Smash that like button if you're watching this on YouTube, and share it with your friends, family, colleagues, whoever you think will enjoy the show, to help spread the word. And I'll also work in a plug here that my newsletter, Public Notice, I have a lot of good stuff in the newsletter this week. In addition to David's piece today, I had Lisa Needham yesterday really unpacking the Georgia indictment, both the details of it and the broader context. And I've got some good stuff coming up yet this week, in Friday, and possibly a special edition on Saturday this week too. So if you are into this podcast, you will probably like my newsletter. You can go to publicnotice.co. And this week I'm offering free trials to all new subscribers. If you take advantage of the free trial, you'll get full access to the site for a week, and then you can make a decision. I think you will like what we're doing, and hopefully sign up longer term as well. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation today with David. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by David Lurie. David is a returning guest to the podcast. I think you were actually on the second episode back in March, before Trump had been indicted 4 times over. So there's been a lot of news since then. Right. But you've also been contributing a lot of good stuff to the newsletter, Public Notice, including today, kind of a pre-mortem on DeSantis's failed presidential campaign, kind of unpacking how and why it went wrong and why a reset will not save him. So David, thanks for making some time this morning to talk.
I guess this is my second. Thanks for having me, Aaron. I guess it's my second pre-mortem, because I did one before he announced, as I recall.
So, yes, yeah, that's right. Kind of, well,
yeah.
And I do want to get into that, and maybe let's maybe start there actually, because I would consider you to be one of the country's, I think, foremost DeSantis experts at this point. And I say that because not only have you been writing about DeSantis for Public Notice, but going back, you were writing about him for the Daily Beast, I think, as far back as like 2019, if not even sooner than that. And so, I think maybe a good place to start, and we will get to some of the Trump stuff that's probably bigger news stories this week. We'll get to that a little bit later. But maybe let's begin with, why did you start writing about DeSantis kind of back when he was sort of off the radar nationally, I would say? And beyond that, are you at all surprised, given your background with him, at how ineffective and kind of flailing his presidential campaign has been?
It's a good question because as I've looked back, this isn't necessarily by design, but there are a couple of individuals during the kind of Trump era who are not Trump that I've written about consistently. Bill Barr was one that I wrote about over a period of years, and DeSantis is the other. Probably comes second to Barr, as you said, because I think the answer to your question is, I think he's an ideal type. He exemplifies, in a negative sense, a lot of what's been going on in the Republican Party during the Trump era. And he's jumped from strategy to strategy to try to amp up and benefit from anger. That's the common thread, the anger of the Trump base. And he's been planning to run for president since he became governor, based on that strategy.
Yeah, and for people who maybe don't follow this stuff as close as you or I do, DeSantis was, when he was in Congress, kind of a Trump lackey. And, Trump has kind of himself brought this up in attacking DeSantis, that he was kind of a nothing in Congress, which is kind of true. I mean, he wasn't a guy that was getting a lot of headlines or generating, like heavily involved in major investigations, things like that. And then when he ran for governor in 2018, kind of the lasting image of that is a campaign ad that he did where he was having his young children build Trump's border wall. And I remember even at the time kind of taking note of that, because it was like it was like something you'd see in like North Korea, like a Trump cult of personality. And that was kind of the centerpiece of his campaign. He ended up squeaking a very narrow victory over Andrew Gillum. And, of course, won by 20 points last year. And I think actually I would refer people back to the first time that you appeared on the podcast, because I think we kind of got into, how the 20-point victory that DeSantis had. It might be incorrect to interpret that as like a huge landslide, in the sense that he was overwhelmingly popular. I mean, there were demographic changes in Florida that contributed to that, factors that go beyond, DeSantis's appeal to Florida voters. But so he kind of came up as like a member of the Trump cult of personality, won in Florida, and now with Republican control of the legislature, there has been very effective in a way, in the sense that he signed lots of legislation into law. He's probably waged the culture war. I was going to say more successfully. I don't know if successful is the right word, but more strenuously than has been the case with other governors or even members of Congress who are Republicans. And he tried to parlay this into a presidential run. Now, maybe this is kind of a good place to take this conversation, is that, when DeSantis launched his bid, which was kind of an unofficial bid for a number of months before he made it official. This was back, over last winter. And, for people, there's been a lot that's happened since then, but it's worth remembering that the midterms went very poorly for Trump, with a lot of his candidates who he campaigned for losing in the Senate. Around that time, the investigations into him were ramping up. And coming out of that midterm cycle, DeSantis was kind of the great Republican hope as someone who could beat Joe Biden in 2024. And that led to a situation in the January, February, March, where DeSantis in some of the national polling was pretty close to Trump, including, being slightly ahead of him in certain polls. And so what do you think changed? Let's go from that point in time where it looked like DeSantis was kind of a viable alternative to Trump, someone who could really challenge him for the nomination, to this point, maybe 6 months or so later, where he's become kind of this clownish punchline. As you detailed in your piece today for Public Notice, he's kind of getting punked not only by Trump, but by members of the Florida delegation in Congress who traveled with Trump to the Iowa State Fair and kind of humiliated him while DeSantis was there as well over the weekend. How do you explain that, kind of disintegration from being in a real position of strength a few months ago to being kind of like a joke here, in midsummer?
Well, I think you've been an excellent DeSantis watcher, and it's because, among other things, you've picked up on his clownishness. He is a clown. He's anyone who pays even the slightest attention to him from the beginning would recognize that he has incredibly bad political skills and is entirely non-charismatic. But as for that's my preamble to answering your question. But what's happened, in my opinion, in this critical time period between his reelection as governor, right, and now, is that DeSantis has pursued exactly the same strategy from that point. Last year, right? November of last year, until now. He is not what you would call a supple politician who responds to the situation that he's in and modifies his strategy and his tactics in response to the environment, which of course is the critical attribute of any successful politician. I'm not a pundit, but I think that any political observer would agree with me that that's what you've got to be able to do, is observe what your audience is doing, observe what's going on in the country, and respond. DeSantis doesn't do that. So he picked a strategy. And the strategy was, as we all know, I think most of your viewers know, to attack Black people and LGBT people, and more broadly,
migrants.
Yeah, migrants, of course, but more broadly, anyone who's not a white Christian, right, in the country,
yeah,
and demonize them, right? And he picked various, as you mentioned, in the case of migrants, various hot button enemies to go after. In almost every case, they were individuals or groups that were totally defenseless, right? And usually victims of one sort or another in the society, and attacked them. So right as he was amping up his presidential campaign, and this was by design, right? He attacked asylum seekers, right? And had this performatively sadistic event filmed live on Fox News, in which he dumped a bunch of defrauded migrants on Martha's Vineyard, where Barack Obama and other prominent African Americans vacation in the summer. That was going on at the same time as he was attacking teachers and literally, threatening to jail teachers in Florida. And as he was going after a very popular elected prosecutor in Tampa who he illegally removed from office. Mm-hmm. So those were the signal strategies that he was pursuing at that time. He's pursuing exactly the same strategies right now. I mean, there's nothing has changed.
Yeah, it seems like Republicans, though, broadly are okay with all that stuff. I mean, it's more with DeSantis. It seems like, as we've kind of touched upon, it's the lack of charisma, the lack of kind of political skills that seems to be holding him back more than anything. And I'm curious if you think that there was even an effective case against Trump for him to make. Right. Because the more that I've kind of thought about this, I mean, it seems like it's almost an impossible needle to thread for some of these Republican candidates, where they are trying to not alienate Trump supporters who they need. It's such a large contingent of the party at this point that you can't really win a primary without winning over some of them. And if you attack Trump, they love Trump, so you're going to kind of push them away. Now, I always thought that with DeSantis, and this has come up a few times, with different guests that I've had on the podcast where we've talked politics, that the most effective case would have been to kind of contrast his status as a winner in Florida and the success that he's had signing a lot of bills into law with kind of the, obviously Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election, the fact that he lost the election, of course, but then also, that he wasn't an extremely effective president. I mean, you could look at even the border wall, which DeSantis, again, in 2018 made a big part of his campaign, that he supported Trump's efforts to build one, but Trump, didn't really succeed in actually building one. So, I thought there were a few areas there, basically the winner-loser dynamic, but, maybe what the calculation was. I don't know if they focus group this. I'm sure they did, the campaign did some work of its own to kind of affirm that this might not have been a wise strategy. I would assume the calculation was just that if you went there, you would alienate too many Trump supporters, and you need those people, to kind of reach a critical mass in this primary.
I think those are all good observations. I have a couple of things, though, that, again, I just having watched this process of the campaign disintegrating, a few responses to that. First of all, simple fact is there was never a strategy of going after Trump. The strategy was, I actually think, to the extent they had one and articulated one, very close to the one you just articulated. And in fact, DeSantis, his team, there was an article in Politico right before they announced, in which it was a rare case in which somebody in the campaign off the record went to mainstream media outlet and explained their strategy. They said the strategy is going to be to say that we're winners, Trump's not a winner, and we're far more extremist than Trump, and that what the base wants is a really, really vile and mean candidate who's really going to punch down harder on gay people and teachers, et cetera, and women who want reproductive rights, and we're going to show that we're far more mean, toward these, groups than Trump is, and he's implemented that, right, to some extent, right. He's emphasized. You'll recall, your readers will recall, and I discussed in the latest piece, the secretly DeSantis authored videotape that attempted to demonstrate that Trump is too friendly to LGBT people, but actually appeared to demonstrate DeSantis' own affinity for, as Secretary Buttigieg put it, oiled up bodybuilders.
Yeah. No, I thought the way you described that was great, where you said that it's simultaneously homophobic and homoerotic, which
I don't think I came up with that. I can't remember who did.
That sticks with me.
I'm sorry, I didn't
it's very
give credit.
true. It's very true.
Yeah, but I think Secretary Buttigieg did as well.
Yeah.
But the same kind of approach is the one they've used on reproductive rights. In a very mechanistic way. Well, let's sign a 6-week virtual abortion ban in Florida. First DeSantis had signed 6-week one, 15-week one, then he signed a 6-week one.
Right.
The idea was, well, that's going to really show that we're more antagonistic to abortion, reproductive rights than Trump is. And Trump was like, good, do that.
Yeah.
Because what he recognizes and DeSantis doesn't is that it's not a position on an issue, right? It's not that is the reason that Trump, any particular issue is the reason that Trump controls the Republican Party. As you said, it's because of his charismatic personal connection to the base. And that was part of your question to me. And I agree with you. That's why it's impossible to attack Trump by being more right-wing than Trump.
Yeah. Well,
it doesn't work.
Yeah. let's kind of jump from there because as we're talking about this connection that Trump has with the base and how the primary at this point seems more like a coronation than an actual contest. But one thing that kind of occurred to me as I was prepping for this podcast and just thinking about topics to discuss with you is that let's hop over to the Trump indictments. But this is kind of related to what you just said, where obviously with the federal cases, I think we all kind of understand that Trump, if he wins, can make those go away. It doesn't even need to be a self-pardon. It could just be, making Matt Gaetz the attorney general, and
Right.
he'll close up these he'll close up these cases basically. But obviously, with the Georgia situation is a little bit unique. And New York as well. But where these are state charges, so there might be kind of a roundabout way that Trump, leveraging his power as the chief executive of the country, could make them go away, but it wouldn't be quite as direct or neat and clean as it is in the federal context. So, what does that look like? I know you mentioned in a DM exchange that we had, yesterday, kind of prepping for this, the question of this venue change, which it seems like the Trump lawyers are going to push for from Georgia into federal courts. If that happens, maybe that kind of changes the situation where then if Trump wins, he can make the Georgia charges go away. But, I'm wondering, it seems like, Fani Willis has indicated she wants to bring this to a speedy trial, which, I think the time frame I've seen is like a 6-month type time frame before the trial would begin. There's a lot of complexities having, 19 defendants, and she wants to try them all at once. So that could get, very complex. But, if Trump, hypothetically, if he is tried and convicted and that happens before the 2024 election, what does that do to his presidential campaign? I mean, is that still, would he still be kind of out awaiting sentencing and then he can still campaign? If he wins, could that be something the Supreme Court would weigh in on, where maybe they would defer his sentence until after he's done in office? I'm just wondering with this Georgia case in particular, given the uniqueness, that it's a state case, not a federal one, if this could present some unique challenges for Trump on the campaign trail.
Aaron, as usually your question mirrors a lot of questions that I've been asking myself. You covered a lot in that question. And although I have, one of my identities is as a legal expert on the internet, I think it's very important to say the things that I'm not an expert in. One of them is Georgia criminal law. That's point one. Point two is I've only skimmed this very substantial indictment in Georgia, and I'm not a master of the factual allegations, let alone the legal theories under Georgia law that it articulates. But I'll say the following, which I can speak to. First of all, you're right. There's already been a motion filed on behalf of Mark Meadows to effectuate what's called a removal of the criminal case to federal court. This is an extremely rare, but statutorily provided for mechanism to transfer a case brought by a state prosecutor in a state court into federal court. Lawyers will be familiar with a similar mechanism that's used to bring civil cases, disputes between private parties into federal court. This is a similar mechanism, but it applies to criminal cases, and it's solely for the purpose of protecting federal officers. So the idea is if a state, and I'm speaking in broad terms, if a state prosecutor comes in and interferes essentially with a state officer's activities by bringing a criminal case, maybe validly, but still bringing a criminal case against them, it relates to their activities as a federal officer. And they have, among other things, they have to have the case has to relate to their work as a federal officer, and they have to have a federal defense, meaning a defense under federal law, under a federal statute of the Constitution. Then the case can be removed into federal court. Okay. Mm-hmm. So Meadows has already filed a motion to do that. His argument is, in broad strokes, that the activities that he is being charged criminally with arise from his service as chief of staff for Trump. And he says he'll have defenses under federal law or under the Constitution, and that the case should be brought into federal court.
Who
If he
hears
succeeds,
that?
the entire case will be brought to federal court.
Okay,
Meaning,
and for a motion like that, who makes the call on that motion? Is it yeah?
well, it is made by the federal judge, but one feature of this is that the state case continues to go forward unless and until there's a determination that all the requisites for removal are satisfied by the judge. Um, in his motion, again, just filed yesterday, Meadows says, judges, you should just immediately stop the state case, but that's unlikely to happen, in my opinion. So there'll be a fight over this, and ultimately it could go to the Supreme Court. Other defendants, including Trump, might bring such a motion, although they can still piggyback on Meadows. So that's one thing, and that's something that people have to keep an eye out for, because then let us say the federal judge decides that this case should be in federal court, then the prosecutor will have a decision to make. Does she want to fight that determination? Well, then that case will be on ice until it goes to the Supreme Court while this removal issue, is decided.
Yeah.
She may have to make the Hobson's choice, or she may make the Hobson's choice of litigating the case in federal court. Okay. And then some have asked, well, then what if Trump is convicted in federal court? Could he pardon himself, or could he stop the prosecution? I don't know if he could pardon himself, but he could certainly muck about in various ways. He'll probably find it easier. We're in really uncharted territory.
Yeah.
It's also not clear, even if it's in state court, right? Even if the case remains in state court, it's far from clear that a state court trial proceeding can continue against a criminal trial proceeding can continue against a president. This is an issue that didn't.
It seems likely that it seems likely the Supreme Court would weigh in on that, right? Because it's uncharted waters. You would need. There's no precedent to refer to, right? So.
Yeah, well, in New York, there was a civil case against Trump brought by a woman who said that Trump defamed her by lying about his sexual
Jean Carroll
harassment of her. Yeah. Sorry,
Jean Carroll's who you're referring to, right?
No, this is a different individual. I can't remember her name, and I apologize. She was a contestant on The Apprentice.
Okay.
At one point, and the issue was your viewers may remember the Paula Jones case that was brought against Clinton. Yeah. In that case, the court allowed a federal civil case to proceed against Trump. But
Clinton. You're talking about the Paula Jones?
Against Clinton.
Yes.
Yeah, the Paula Jones case, right? The question of whether a state court can try and depose, et cetera, or in this case, criminally try a president, or in that case, it was a civil case. How far could it go? That was really dicey. Okay, because he's a federal officer, he heads the federal government. To have a state court exercising dominion over the president, literally, right. In that case, a civil proceeding, in this case, would be a criminal case while he's sitting in the White House. It's arguably, more than arguably, a violation of the separation of powers. So people who believe that it's just like a no-brainer, that case will continue and Trump will be will be tried and potentially put in jail while he's in the White House. I think that hold your breath on that one. I find that to be unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah. How likely do you think it is that, I don't want to get too down the speculation rabbit hole here, but I guess my kind of assumption at this point is that it's unlikely we'll see any of these trials before the election. It just seems like there's many ways that the defense can kind of drag things out. But especially in the Georgia situation, I mean, it does seem like there are going to be many hearings that Trump is going to have to physically be there for, which could present some challenges in terms of campaigning. Although I do kind of wonder with this upcoming, if it ends up being Biden versus Trump, rematch here, there's such known commodities that I'm not even sure. It feels like we're so polarized that they'd be kind of fighting over like that, I guess, which is kind of all of our elections these days, that 5% in the middle. But it seems like it really could present some challenges just from a logistical standpoint, having to be at these hearings and then still trying to maintain some semblance of a campaign amid all of that.
As far as whether it is practicable for any of these cases to go to trial, I tend to agree with you. I will say the special counsel team designed both cases to maximize the possibility of them going to trial rapidly. I'm not an expert in cases involving classified documents, which are a specialized, field even within criminal law. My understanding is they rarely go to trial, first of all, because the government is reticent about putting these documents on the record. And usually on the other hand, usually when they bring them, they have, as in Trump's case, the defendant dead to rights. So there's an incentive on both sides to reach a plea deal.
Yeah.
When they do go to trial, it takes an incredibly long period of time to the pretrial process, which can always be complicated. It's particularly complicated. But my understanding is that they really structured this case initially to make it possible for it to be brought relatively rapidly. They got all the discovery together and prepared to turn it over to Trump quickly, which is unusual in those cases. But of course, the judge has no interest in bringing the case to trial.
Yeah.
Rapidly in Florida, Judge Cannon. So that case, I think you can. I'm not speaking with some special lawyerly knowledge, but I tend to agree with you that case isn't going to trial. And of course, the government's amended the indictment. I think they're that to me is a signal that they kind of expect, the case is going to go on for quite some time. The case in Washington was, everyone who's praised the indictment as really thoughtful in terms of both the way it presented facts to the public, but also the legal strategy. I think they're right. It's a really tight case, but it involves really tricky, legal issues.
The charges are tricky.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the factors there that's probably just worth mentioning is that Trump was the only one charged in that case with the unindicted co-conspirators, which I think from what I've read seems like that reduces the complexity a little bit, because they would just be Trump on trial. Had they charged some of the co-conspirators, then you're in the situation where, well, are they all tried at the same time? You have to kind of unpack the different defenses that are being made. I mean, it's just Trump who would be on trial, so it seems pretty straightforward.
You're right, but straightforward. I agree with everything you said, but straightforward in a very, very tricky kind of by definition situation. For example, virtually all but maybe the sixth, because we're not sure who the sixth unindicted co-conspirator is. It's probably Trump's.
Boris Epstein is pretty heavily.
Yes, probably Epstein, according to Maggie Haberman, and she's usually right. But basically, virtually all the co-conspirators, unindicted co-conspirators, have been indicted. In Georgia. It's a very tricky situation. But you're right. They structured it in a way designed to make it as simple as it could be made.
Yeah. But it's something that's really kind of jumped out to me, and this isn't really surprising, I wouldn't say, and you've probably picked up on this too, that, of course you have Trump lawyers who are blanketing the TV airwaves. They're on MSNBC, they're on Fox, they're on Newsmax, they're on OAN. And they're very much making a political defense, more so than a legal defense, which I guess isn't necessarily surprising when you're on TV. But you mentioned earlier that they kind of have these indictments indicate the extent to which they have Trump dead to rights on these federal charges. And what's your sense of, like, is there even available legal defenses? I'm wondering how this, if these do go to trial, like what the defense is going to look like. I mean, if you are just kind of screaming about Hunter Biden or like a rigged justice system, that's not really a legal defense. And I wouldn't necessarily expect them to telegraph that stuff publicly, but when the facts are this damning, you mentioned that in a normal context, this would be the sort of situation where a plea deal would be on the table, and obviously for reasons that are unique to Trump, it isn't, because he's running for office. But reading these indictments, I mean, is there even like a compelling legal argument for the defense to be made here?
Well, here is where, I hesitate to speak because there's so many, and I'm not being sarcastic. Eminent legal experts who've spoken before me. I haven't written about, including people who've written about these indictments for your newsletter, uh, uh, Lisa and Liz, who've done really great work. But let me say this. First of all, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, and you can tell me if I'm heading into the weeds. I'm a lawyer, and I try not to, but sometimes I do. There is one statutory issue that's a really big deal in the case, and that is the obstruction of an official proceeding charge, which is one of the charges that has been brought against Trump. That statute was amended after the Enron case. The Supreme Court had narrowed the existing obstruction statute, so Congress broadened it. And the prosecutors have taken advantage of its current breadth, right, to argue that the official proceeding that was obstructed here was the election, right, and in the was the in the counting of the electoral votes, right?
Yep.
And that's although the conduct is different, it's the same kind of theory. That is, the obstruction of the counting of electoral votes is what's been used against a number of the insurrectionists, right? And that most judges, except for I believe one Trump-appointed judge, have ruled that the government's theory, right, that the counting of the electoral votes is an official proceeding that falls within the scope of the statute. That's probably going to go to the Supreme Court, that issue. So that's one item, right, that's in the Trump indictment. It's a legal theory that's going to get tested. Another legal theory that I think much less of myself as a lawyer, but that is linked up with the freedom of speech kind of argument that you hear from Trump people on TV, is the good faith argument. Okay, and the idea there is Trump believed in good faith that his conduct was permissible. Okay.
Doesn't that kind of fall apart? Because doesn't that fall apart with the analogy of, like, you can believe that a bank owes you money, but that doesn't really give you license to go rob the bank, right? I mean, that's kind of where the good faith thing, at least in my very primitive understanding of how of how the legal system works, it doesn't seem to kind of work in that way, because Trump might have believed in good faith that he won, but that still doesn't give him a right to put together fake slates of electors and all the things that he did.
This is a complicated issue, as you advert to, but let me just try to put it in the context that it will arise, which is what kind of jury instruction will Trump be entitled to when this case goes to trial. So one thing we've heard is that Trump will be entitled to a advice of counsel defense argument, instruction. Okay, I'm skeptical of that. That's a defense that typically comes up, and I'm going to use the term with malum prohibitum statutes. Okay, so they're statutes that are malum in se, meaning they're just wrong in themselves, right? And they're crimes that are malum prohibitum. Like the most common example that comes up is a tax law, right? You're charged criminally with creating a false tax shelter. Okay, Now you go to a lawyer and she gives you a memo saying this tax shelter is legal. And you say, look, this is a malum prohibitum statute. I'm no expert in the tax laws. They're very arcane, right? So I had to go to a lawyer and she gave me this memo and it told me that and there were many cases about this. Very few of those cases are even brought criminal, right? And it's because there's the guy who did this knew exactly what they were doing. They knew it was a crime, and they basically had a lawyer, paper it for them, right?
Right.
And there's all kinds of evidence in that circumstance that the opinion they got is a sham, right? And that maybe even the lawyer may have been involved
Sure.
in the scheme, and maybe they paid off a lawyer saying, "Hey, if I give you $100,000 on the side, will you?" And you ignore the following facts for me that are relevant. They give me the opinion anyway. There's all kinds of evidence that the legal advice Trump got was sham in nature, right? In fact, and that's a point that the special counsel is making by charging Cheeseborough and so by naming Cheeseborough and
Eastman.
Eastman as co-conspirators, right?
Yeah. Well, let me. I want to ask you. I want to ask you a question on that point before we get too far away
Sure.
from it, because sure, yeah, Trump was getting really bad advice from whether Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, all these people. But also, the indictment talks about how the White House counsel pushed back on Trump. I mean,
exactly. That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I question Aaron. I didn't interrupt you. I'm sorry. Got too enthusiastic.
No. I think you see where I was going with that.
That's exactly the kind of situation where you wouldn't get an advice of counsel of defense, right? Is where you go to 5 lawyers, they say this tax shelter is totally illegal, and then you go to one of them and say, like, I pay you extra money and ask you to ignore the following facts. Will you give me yeah, I'll do it. And then your lawyer's your co-conspirator, right? And that's exactly what went on here. According to the indictment, right? That
Right.
Trump and let me. There's one thing that's really important about this, and the indictment makes this very clear. All of these "quote unquote" opinions, the foundation of them is factually false, right? Because they're all based on the proposition that there was a good faith belief, it's a good reason to believe that there had been a fraud in the election, right? That's the whole premise of all, that if the election, there's massive fraud in swing states, right? What can what remedy is available, right? And of course, as the special counsel indictment makes exceedingly clear, there was no such evidence, right? Yeah. So the foundation for these, I'm putting these quotes, opinions, right, is a factually false one, and everyone knew it, including Eastman and Cheeseborough, the lawyers and the other lawyers who were providing the advice. So that's what I'm getting at is, in case I'm being unclear, I don't think he's going to get an advice of counsel instruction, but nonetheless, one of the charges against him is a fraud charge. Now, we're used to hearing about fraud charges that are pecuniary in nature, when someone defrauds someone into buying
a timeshare or something.
A course at a Trump university that doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's better.
But in this case, it's a fraud in which the goal was to steal the election, from the voters. So, I'm being a little bit broad brush, but that's essentially it's literally the victims of the American people, of this fraud. In a fraud case, a defendant is almost always going to be entitled to a good faith instruction. Okay. But that doesn't mean that and there'll be some theory about how their actions they'll come up with some theory that the judge will say meets the minimal standard for getting that instruction. They believe this, against all evidence, that what they were doing was, permissible, whatever. But getting that instruction doesn't mean you're going to win the jury's going to buy it. Are you with me? You know?
Right.
And as you said, in this case, there's going to be all kinds of countervailing evidence. And there's one other thing which you asked about and you hit the nail on the head. It is not a defense to fraud that you thought lying was in service of a higher end. Okay. And that's what, so it was one thing if Trump said, look, I said there was, this is what I imagine the good faith instructions can be based on. I believed that there was fraud in Georgia. I know that there's all this evidence that I was wrong, but I, Donald J. Trump, honestly believed that there was fraud in the mother and the daughter who who getting death threats were guilty.
Yeah.
And that's what I imagine the instruction will be. So I didn't knowingly lie about that. And that would be a defense to a criminal fraud. Okay, because you wouldn't have the necessary state of mind to commit fraud. If you honestly believe that what you're saying was true, that is actually a defense to fraud, criminal fraud. Not necessarily civil fraud, but it's criminal fraud. But it's not a defense, for example, for taking an illegal act, right? And that's where this obstruction of the official proceeding comes in, right? So even if Trump honestly believed that there was fraud in Georgia, that doesn't mean that his illegal act of scheming to create fake electors, for example, and trying to muck up the counting of the electoral college votes, that's a justification defense, and that's not recognized in the law. How about not being clear? That's right. So that's even if he believed that there was fraud in the election, that doesn't justify obstruction. It's the same idea. You can't, like, if you believe you're innocent, right? But there's a witness against you who says you're guilty, and you kill them.
No, exactly. Yeah,
so they don't testify. It's like, they were gonna lie about me, so I killed them. I'm giving that's not a defense. But I hope like that gets the point. I get you getting the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that there's no evidence of the election being stolen. Well, let's wait until next Monday, right? Because Trump has this big news conference where he's promising the smoking gun. That the election was stolen from him. All these years later, he's finally going to make the case. So,
right.
I'm actually very, very curious to see. I'm sure it will be an absolute circus, but it reminds me of that was always kind of Mike Lindell's lane.
Right.
Teasing the proof of the election fraud. That's always his next show, his next rally. He's gonna have the proof, and it never seems to materialize. But yeah,
exactly. I think Mike Lindell's gonna be pissed because Trump is now stealing his thunder.
Well, maybe Mike Lindell. He might be there. I don't know. We'll see. He's teasing a big event on Monday, so stay tuned for that. I'll probably have some coverage. I'm guessing next Wednesday's edition.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. But last thing here before we get out of here, you had mentioned as we were DMing in preparation for this that you've been following the Hunter Biden situation.
Okay.
Now I know that people I don't want people to turn the podcast off if you made it this far in. When you hear that we're going to talk about Hunter Biden, but the situation that I think you could provide a little bit of clarity on is, at least inferring from the DM that you sent, is this kind of controversy swirling around David Weiss being made special counsel. There might be, kind of reading between the lines of some of the stuff you sent me and just reading news articles, there might be more going on here than than the investigation necessarily getting more serious or perilous. It might be, you might want to bring charges in a different jurisdiction. But, let's maybe back up just a step here with the plea deal that fell apart where, Hunter Biden was going to plead guilty to tax and gun charges that would have, in all likelihood, kept him out of serving any prison time, but would have involved other penalties. And from what I have read, it seems like those charges, given the facts here, were broadly appropriate. Now, you can find experts who say, on the gun charge should have been maybe a little more stiff, or the tax charge maybe should have been a little more lenient, depending on who you talk to there. But very broadly, kind of explain to us what's going on with the Hunter Biden stuff, and where you think this goes from here.
Sure. First of all, anybody who I'm going to say something that may antagonize them, but anyone who tells you on television that, hey, this charge should have been brought and that charge should have been brought, disregard what they're saying, because they don't know the facts. Okay, so the facts are not public, and plea agreements are based on a negotiation between the government, which has tremendous power, right, and defendants who have no power, right? But in this case, of course, Hunter Biden was well represented. So he had the ability to do what some defendants don't have, which is present to the government in detail the risks they had of losing if they brought particular charges to trial. And that's what you can bet led to the deal, right? The government, I assure you, didn't say, we really want to go easy on you, Hunter. How can we come up with the easiest deal that we can on you? They made a deal, and it was negotiated over a long period of time, and they went to the judge. I'm going to say something that is not based on the facts, because I don't know the facts anymore, but is a legal issue that, frankly, I think is pretty substantial. Okay, and that is, there's a real problem with the government reneging on this deal, is what they've done. The deal was not unusually complex, but it had some wrinkles to it. Okay, it had two parts. One was the plea agreement, which was a plea agreement relating to the tax charges that he agreed to plead guilty to as misdemeanors. And there, the government and the defendant enter into an agreement, right? And the judge either accepts it or doesn't accept it. And that was what that hearing was about. She didn't accept it for various reasons. The reason she didn't accept it, as I understand it related to another part of the agreement, which was the diversion agreement.
Okay.
And that's an agreement that it's commonly entered into with substance abuse. People who have substance abuse problems that led them to, and also have criminal problems, right? And so the idea is, you're going to stay out of jail, you're going to get treatment, and if you do that, the government, for a certain period of time, the government won't charge you. So basically, there's an axe being held over your head, right? You're being diverted to treatment and supervision, et cetera, et cetera. And if you stay clean, you'll be fine. Otherwise, you'll be charged. Okay. Now, as I understand it, and I could have this wrong, but the wrinkle was that because this was going to go on for several years, Hunter Biden's lawyers were concerned, probably well-founded concern, that if the DOJ controlled how this diversion agreement worked, they would just charge him, right? No matter what he did, if Trump became president.
Sure.
So they proposed to have the judge be the one to decide if he was complying. And the judge said, wait a second, this is a diversion program. It's supposed to divert the defendant from the court system. And it's supposed to be the DOJ that supervises, not me. And she's correct about that. This was an unusual wrinkle, right? A diversion agreement is not a plea agreement. It's not, which is supervised by the court. It's an agreement between the DOJ alone and the defendant. So the judge had a reasonable, it appears, basis to say this is weird and problematic, because I, the judge, am not supposed to decide whether the government brings charges against someone. That's the decision whether or not to bring a charge, is a executive branch decision. So I hope I've been clear. That was the weird wrinkle to this, was that the diversion agreement involved the judge. Okay, and so she said, I don't want to be involved in that, and I don't think I can. But of course, there had been all this criticism of the agreement, and one of the tricky parts about this deal is that the key element of the deal for Hunter Biden was not in the plea agreement. Okay, it was in the diversion agreement. And the key benefit for Hunter Biden, or for anyone entering a plea deal, is they're not going to be charged with anything else, right? You don't say, okay, I'll plead guilty, to the following charges, the judge will sentence me to jail, et cetera, and then you can charge me with whatever you want afterwards. That's not what defendants do. So the government has said, we want him to enter into the diversion agreement without any guarantee that we're not going to charge him with anything else. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And that to me seems like a very reasonable thing.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah. Go ahead. Well, I want to. I've kind of like a zoom out question on this a little bit too, because the reason that we're even talking about this is because it's become kind of this way to sort of both sides the Trump stuff, I think, to a
right.
point.
Exactly.
And so, because we're in the weeds of diversion agreements and kind of how these plea deals usually work, and I guess it's important to kind of be mindful.
I agree with
you. Not that you're not, but I'm just for listeners.
I agree with you, and I'm not giving this tutorial about diversion agreements and plea agreements, because I think that it's something that everyone should know about. What I think happened, and I think it's very unfortunate, is that the now special counsel knuckled under political pressure to go after Hunter Biden. There's really no other way to explain what's happening. It's really unfortunate because yesterday they filed a document, incredibly disingenuous document, that really it's not good to see the government filing documents like this, basically saying, we had every right to just enter into this deal and then disregard it with Hunter Biden, is the substance of it. And I'm exaggerating what they said. I'm spinning a little bit, but that's the substance of it. And I think the only way you can interpret that is that Weiss is under pressure, to show that he's being tough on Hunter Biden. And the Attorney General, who, just as you said, officially named him as special counsel, isn't going to get near that, because he doesn't want to be accused of being biased in favor of the president. And the result is that whatever you think of Hunter Biden, I have no particular opinion about him. I don't know anything about him. As I said, I know nothing about the facts underlying his case. What I've read in the newspaper, but he's being treated unfairly because of this. And the case is not being handled in the way that a normal, normal criminal case, would be handled. And I think that's really unfortunate.
That's interesting. I'm filing that away, because this could be I might twist your arm sometime down the line to do a piece on the unfair treatment of Hunter Biden, because that is actually because the whole narrative is the flip side of it, that he's he had the sweetheart deal, and it is, and that it's an example of the Bidens getting off easy and the Trump family being these victims. And so we will have to leave it there, because I need to respect the time of my producers here too. But thank you so much. Really fascinating stuff. We covered DeSantis, Trump, even some Hunter Biden. So wide-ranging discussion today. And one more time here at the end, I will kind of plug the piece that you wrote and had published this today on kind of DeSantis's collapsing campaign, the second, as you put it, pre-mortem. We've done two autopsies on this body already, and it's still wriggling around on the table, I guess. So on that note, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for publishing those pieces. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of the Aaron Rupar Show drop every Thursday. Please like the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your circle. Thank you for tuning in.